Hey everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. Today I want to design a lure, a jerkbait actually, but a little bit different than the typical jerkbait. Let me show you. This is the shape I'm talking about, and some of you might be looking at that and say, wait a minute, that's not a jerkbait, that looks like a flatfish, but it's not. Let's put the eye on and see if that makes a difference. So with the eye on, you can see that's the forward end, and this weird flat spot I'm going to explain in a minute. Now it is going to have a dive lip or dive bib coming down at a pretty steep angle, somewhere around 50 degrees off horizontal. We'll have the typical hook hanger eyes, one at the tail and one at the belly, and the tie-on eye will be as close to the bib as I can get it. Now the idea here is to amplify the erratic action on the jerkbait. So a jerkbait is typically fished by cranking it down to depth. So the dive lip gets you down to depth, and then you pause the lure. The lure will be very near suspending, sometimes a little floating, sometimes a little sinking. Ours, I want to make it slow sinking. After that pause, you're going to jerk it, let it sit, jerk it, let it sit, maybe crank a little bit, jerk it, let it sit. So it's kind of an action finesse lure. Typically, it'll get hit on the pause. And what I've done to the design to sort of amplify that erratic action when you jerk it is to add this flat spot. Typically that round humped body will go in a nice arc all the way across, but I want a flat spot on the back. So as the water flows across the body, it ends up coming across this flat spot and creating vortices, loosening up the tail. And if you look down here, this is the top view, and this semi-oval is what that flat spot will look like from the top. Maybe it makes a little more sense with the top view of the bib in there. So this is almost sort of backwards to a lure that you'd want to make really hydrodynamically efficient, something that actually flows through the water without creating a whole lot of turbulence. So it'll be about 3.5 inches, which is about 8.9 centimeters. And while the center is right about there, and typically that's where the widest part would be, I don't want it there. I want to push it back to about 2/3 from the head. So right about here. And I'm doing that because I want to rear weight this thing. I want the weight and balance to be towards the back. And as I add weight to the back, the lure is going to want to be tail heavy. And I don't really want it too tail heavy. So I want to add some mass back here, which will give me more flotation. The reason I want most of my ballast weight back behind center line is because I want to make sure that it's back behind the center of drag for the lure. The center of drag will be somewhere between the nose and the halfway point, and I want that weight back. So when I jerk it, it'll crank, and then between that lip and the drag on the body, it'll want to stop, but the mass in the tail is going to want to keep moving through momentum. So it should jerk, and then as it stops, it should go sideways. How important is that? I don't know. I just want to add a little more action to the action. And that wide point will be just a little under 3/4 of an inch, 11/16 actually. And for those that are fractionally impaired, that would be 0.68 or thereabouts inches, or right at 17 millimeters. And we'll be making it out of this piece of white ash that I cut from my property a while back. It still has the bark on it, and it's plenty thick, plenty long, and plenty deep for that contour of the body. So something along those lines. I went ahead and drew out the contour of sort of the top view or bottom view actually. And I won't be using that right away. I'll be peeling that off and putting it on the blank later. All right, so before I actually cut this out, let me just explain why I selected this kind of wood. When I'm considering what kind of wood to carve a lure out of, mostly I'm considering the behavior of the lure. Do I want it to sink? Do I want it to float? Do I want it to suspend? And the more negatively buoyant I want that lure, the denser wood I want to use. I don't want to have to add a lot of weight. The more I have to drill into it, the more chances I have of screwing up the lure. Because remember, you're adding the weight after you've got it nicely carved and almost completely sanded. That's not the time to take excessive risk drilling giant holes. So if I had decided to go with balsa, I would probably be adding twice as much weight into the same size lure. So that becomes a real challenge. The denser the wood, the less weight I have to add. Of course, there are diminishing returns. The denser the wood, the harder it is to cut and sand and shape. So there's no need to go with ironwood or anything, just something heavy enough so that you don't have to add a ton of weight. Got the tape remounted on the top this time so that I can easily cut it, because cutting it on the rocky side is no fun at all. All right, those cuts are usually pretty rough. They're not really intended to be perfect. I just need a general shape and most of the meat off so I can start shaping it cleanly on the belt sander. All right, that's closer to the contour we're shooting for. We still got some work to do here. The contours have been smoothed out. It's pretty close to being symmetric. I still got some work to do. I'm gonna have to work these corners way down. And now that I've got the wide spot kind of worked into it already, I can take that tape off. And you can see I got a little bit of a hump there. I'll work that out right now and smooth out all these blade marks right here. I've already done it on the bottom, it's nice and smooth. So I'll start working on it, and when I get closer to being close to finish sanding, I'll get back to you. Got it pretty close to the shape that I want. Still rough still, but you can see the flat spot, I hope. And the contours are pretty good. I still have to work on it to get a little better symmetry. It's a little rough, some saw marks still in it and everything. I'm gonna go ahead and widen this lip slot though, because I'm gonna put a Lexan lip in it and they're a little wider than that blade. And what I've done is taken a broken hacksaw blade and glued the two halves together to make it the right thickness. And it makes pretty quick work of widening the slot. And that's got it pretty good. All right, I'm really happy with this shape. It's a really cool combination of hard edges and just these really pretty round shapes. I softened this flat spot just a tiny bit so it's not so harsh. So it just has the slightest little bit of roundness to it. I was a little afraid that it would be so radical that the lure wouldn't crank straight. So we're ready to go ahead and drill in the holes for the tie-on eye and 2 hook eyes. And the most critical one is this one, because it's got to go just above the slot. We'll run this one straight up parallel to that flat spot. And for the belly eye, I like to angle it either forwards or backwards. And in this case, since I got a lot more meat in the back, I'm going that way. A little bit of an angle, nothing too radical. All right, so now I want to go ahead and seal it so I can check the volume on it, because the weighting on this is going to be a little more critical than most of the lures I make, because I want this one to be very slow sinking. Almost suspending, but not quite. The idea is that it'll be slow sinking in fresh water and probably pretty close to suspending, or maybe just slightly floating in salt water. So I'm going to put in a little temporary screw eye so that I can seal it with some UV resin. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go get something to eat while this thing is setting. And my wife's gone for a few days, so it's probably going to be pork rinds or sardines. We'll see. All right, those were some good sardines. It looks well sealed. I'm going to go ahead and give it a light sanding with maybe like 240 grit just to knock down the little bit of texture that this stuff built up. All right, I'm going to use my gram scale and we'll set our water container up there and I'll zero it. And now I'm going to go ahead and submerge the lure without touching the sides or the bottom and trying not to get much of that screw eye in there. So 16.82, and that means that this lure displaced 16.82 grams of water, which is equivalent to 16.82 cubic centimeters. So that's our volume. With that piece of information, I know that for this lure just to be perfectly suspending, theoretically, it has to weigh 16.82 grams. And that's including all the hardware, the bib, the paint, the eyes, all that stuff. Some of it we can weigh directly. Others, like the paint and the top coat, we're going to have to just sort of guesstimate it, and hopefully we'll come real close. So let's start weighing hardware. So first thing, I need to actually make the twist eyes for the hook hangers and the tie-in eye. And I'm using 195-pound stainless steel leader wire. And for those of you who just have to know, it's 0.78 millimeters or 0.03 inches. Now what I'll do is just bend a U into it, and using these little jeweler's pliers, I like putting a little shoulder on the eye so it looks like that. And then I'll take my safety wire twisting pliers. I've got a little drill bit, put in the vise head down, and we'll just twist these guys up. And after I trim them up, that's what they end up looking like. I'm going to make two more. All right, first we might as well go ahead and dry fit our hook hangers, tie-in eye, and the tail hook hanger too. That's 0. We'll get that weight. And then the hooks we're going to put on it, the split rings, and the dive bib. And we get 14.65. So now we just subtract and we get 2.17. And that is the amount that we need to get to be theoretically neutral. But from experience, I know that that's not going to cover all the added volume changes that's going to occur with the eyes and a couple of layers of clear coat. So typically I like to go somewhere about 10% above that. But since I really want this to sink really slowly, I'm going to go right at 5%, which is the lowest limit I usually use to add to the target weight. And our target weight is 16.82 grams. So what I do is I just add 5% to the 16.82 grams that we got from the full weight, and we get 17.66. Now I subtract the 14.65 and we get right at 3 grams. So that's what I'm going to put in the lure. And to keep things simple, I'm going to go ahead and just use split shots. I've got that one that's 2.26, and that guy, that brings us to 3.1. It's a little over, but I'm okay with that extra 1/10 of a gram. It's not really going to affect it much, and if it sinks a little bit faster, I'm okay with that. And I'm going to drill the holes for them separately. The big one I'm going to put right at the widest point of the lure, right there. And then I'll put the little one just after that one, just behind that one. And I try to keep the weights as low in the body as possible, so I don't sink them in too much, just enough to cover them up. That'll do that one. Now let me drill the big one. And there you go, just got to fill those holes and sand it back a little bit. And I'll fill them with some UV Cure epoxy resin. And just hit them with the light. And I'll have to top it off after this sets. And that makes a nice cap. I just need to sand it a little bit and we're ready to rock. And After a bit of sanding, they end up really nice and smooth and don't show up under the paint job. I'm going to go ahead and glue in these twist eyes, and I'll get back to you when I'm done. You know, I thought about it for a while. I usually add an eye socket. I wasn't going to on this one, but old habits are hard to break. I'm going to go ahead and do it. And that's what it's going to look like. And I like to put a little droplet of that UV resin at the very bottom of the socket so there isn't a big gap down there to add air behind my eye. I've kind of gotten just a little bit smitten with this shape and the way this thing has come out. This is really right up my alley. I like quirky lures that actually work. That's yet to be seen, I know. But I like this shape so much that I want to preserve my options to be able to make a mold out of this thing. So I don't want to paint it, but I do want to test it. So I'm going to go ahead and put a clear coat on it, and then we'll see where we go from there. Maybe I'll do a paint job and just go and use it, or maybe I'll go ahead and make a mold. But for now, I'm going to put the clear coat on it, and then tomorrow we'll take it to the water and see what it does. Alright, well, it's been like 2 days since I last messed with this thing, and as you can see, it's gone through some changes. I've played around with tinting the UV resin just to see how accurate I could be with it. This really is giving me a hard time getting a good glossy finish on it, and I'm thinking I'm going to go with what I have. Let me show you some of the flaws in here. See, there's a little bit of a ripple down here near the lower edge, and then there's a couple little divots here and there. They're really small, but they're enough to bother me. I don't think I want to mess with it anymore. I'm gonna it's pollen season. It's destined to be a mold blank anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next step. I don't really want to paint it, but I want to test it in the water, and I want it to look kind of cool in the water, so let's silver plate it. And I've got the whole setup ready to go. And this is actually pretty easy to set up once you got all your chemicals mixed and they're in storage. You just pour them into bottles and get cranking. Alright, not too shabby. I have to say, even with all the flaws in it, still looks pretty doggone good. And I'm pretty sure you can see the camera and the tripod and the shop behind the camera all reflected in there. So the next step is I'm just going to put a protective coat on it, put some eyes on it, put some hooks on it, and then we'll see how slow it actually sinks. I've got the bib on there, and I'm just going to put a couple of drops of UV resin right here at the base just to hold it in place while we test it, because I'm going to pull it off when I make my mold. And the nice thing about the UV resin is that I can align this thing while the UV resin's already on there. When I'm sure I like the alignment, I can hit it with the UV light. And that has it pretty firm in there. Let's put some hooks on this thing. Before we go any further, let's just see what the weight is with our hardware. And you can see we've gone about a gram over what were our original target. So, all right, let's see how quickly it sinks in the water. I've got a little bit of green algae at the bottom of this tank. I guess it's time to clean it out. I'm pretty sure it's going to go tail down a little bit because we did put a lot of weight in the back. I'm hoping that my idea of making the back fatter helps a little bit, but we'll see. It's about 4 seconds to go 9 inches. That's pretty slow. So 4 inches to go about 3/4 of a foot, about 5 1/3 seconds per 1 foot. So that gives you a nice long pause and you're only gonna drop a foot. I think that's gonna work exactly how I wanted it to. So nothing left to do but to take this guy out to the water and try to get some good underwater shots. It's tough to get an underwater shot when you jerk a lure and pause it and jerk it and pause it. It's a lot easier to get underwater shots of a steady flow. All right, guys, I'll see you on the water. All right, finally on the lake. It's been really weird. It's windy out. There's a bass tournament going on. I almost couldn't find any space to actually park in the parking lot. Anyway, got it out here. I've been casting it a couple times just to play with it. I came prepared to do some tuning, but it needs 0 tuning. It's pretty amazing. Let me show you what an exaggerated action, that shape and that weight and balance, having that weight near the rear, actually does to this lure. Now, I knew I was making a lure with a big action, but I was pretty surprised at what a big action it actually has. Getting the footage of the twitches is really tough, especially in this murky water. You really don't get a sense for the big movement the body has until you put it in slow motion. All right, I hope I got some good footage of the jerks. Let's go ahead and get some footage of it, just sort of straight line action, just a nice steady flow. I started off really slow with the trolling motor, and then slowly increased speed until it was really giving me the biggest action that it can. I decided to do a little bit of fishing with it, but I didn't have much time because all those tournament fishermen were going to be heading back to the ramp in about 30 minutes. So I cut this short pretty quickly. Alright guys, thanks for sticking with me to the end. I had to get off that lake quick because the end of the tournament was coming, and I got out of there just before the 150 boats showed up at the ramp. So I am going to make a mold of this. It's going to give me a lot of versatility because I really built in a lot of exaggerated action into this. I can tone it down a little bit by moving the weight a little bit forward and then moving the tie-on eye a little higher on the head. Just a 1/16 of an inch is all it's going to take, and it'll soften up the action a little bit, give me a little deeper dive. By making those kinds of changes, I can actually have probably like 3 or 4 different styles of this lure. Once I start making these guys, I'm going to find a way to give some away. And don't forget, I'm actually still pushing hard to try to get 1,000 subscribers on my other channel. That other channel is called Sailing in Real Life. I'll put a link down in the description. Go visit, watch a few videos, subscribe, and leave a message that says here for EA. And you'll be entered into a list of folks where I'm going to pick a winner when we get to 1,000, and you're going to get an entire setup for airbrushing, compressor, and everything. And on our way, maybe at the 600 and 800 mark, we'll give a couple of these guys away. So anything you can do to help me grow that channel a little bit is much appreciated. All right, guys, I'll see you on the next one.